Welcome back, everyone, as we continue our look at Extra History's series from 9 years ago, Sengoku Jidai. It's been fascinating so far. I'm already learning a lot, and I hope you are as well. Just a reminder that we'll be looking at 2 episodes in this video today, episodes 3 and 4. Episodes 5 and 6, which are the conclusion of the series, will be available to our members and patrons as soon as this one goes live for everyone, which means you'll be able to finish up the series right away. And if you haven't seen the first 2 episodes, which were in yesterday's video, the link is in the description so you can go back to the beginning and get caught up. As always, I encourage you to check out Extra History. There's a lot of content I haven't covered on their channel, so there's plenty of stuff that you can look at going back for the last decade or so. There are a few channels on YouTube that I enjoy as much as this one just because of the way they tell the story and the way they present it. I think is very unique and very accessible, I think, to people no matter where you are in terms of how much history you know. Like I said, don't know much about this time period, so I'm learning a lot already. Let's dive in.
Remember how last time we left off with Oda Nobunaga seizing Kyoto and installing Ashikaga Yoshiaki as shogun? Well, you see, there turned out to be one small problem with that. Yoshiaki actually thought he was going to get to be shogun. Nobunaga, on the other hand, was pretty sure that if anybody was going to be ruling Japan, it was going to be Nobunaga. So with this in mind, trouble started after a scant few months in Kyoto. Nobunaga made Yoshiaki send letters to all the surrounding daimyo, inviting them to take dinner with him. Unfortunately, Yoshiaki had already started to send out secret letters of his own to nearby clans.
So, as smart as he has been so far, and he's been really smart, he took advantage of this guy to be able to conquer Kyoto without too much trouble from other people. And it seems maybe he's underestimated a little bit the scheming that has gone on. This guy was willing to use him. So he thinks he's using this guy, but maybe this guy's using him. And so there's kind of this going back and forth with both of them here.
Plans, inviting them to come liberate Kyoto from the hands of the wicked usurper Nobunaga. So you can see how this dinner invitation might seem suspicious to some people. And the head of the Asakura, one of the powerful nearby clans, saw through this offer of an evening snack from Yoshiaki, realizing that Nobunaga was behind the whole thing, and decided it was a trap. Of course, because the invitation had technically been from Yoshiaki and not Nobunaga, when the Asakura refused, Nobunaga declared them traitors to the shogun, and declared...
So here's another example, we've seen this already, where he offers them something knowing that, well, if they accept, great. If they don't accept, even greater.
War on them. A bit much over a dinner party, but hey. And so it was on. Nobunaga marches his forces out of Kyoto to crush the rebellious Asakura. But to get to the Asakura lands, he has to march through Azai territory. If you're Nobunaga, you're thinking, of course, no problem. After all, if you remember from our last episode, Nobunaga's sister was married to the Lord of Azai. Womp womp. So yeah, of course, as soon as Nobunaga and Tokugawa's forces have gotten to Asakura territory, the Azai decide that, what the heck, they've known the Asakura for longer, now is a good time to revolt. So
and we've been seeing this as well. There's so many patterns going on here. We talked in the last episode about how when you would attack, the other people around you would see the opportunity, the vacuum that was created by your forces leaving your own land to jump in. So everybody's opportunistic here. Everybody's looking for the chance to get ahead themselves.
Now, Oda's forces are trapped between 2 powerful clans. The Azai have cut off their retreat to the rear, and the Asakura are in front of them. Their supply lines are in ruins, they're outnumbered. So what'd they do? Well, Nobunaga's first response was to fight everybody, but luckily his generals convinced him that they could split the army and safely slip away by the back roads. And here you've got to give Nobunaga credit.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that he succeeded where so many others failed was that he was always playing to win. He was willing to take a desperate gamble if it was the only chance he had, but he wasn't a man who acted rashly or out of temper.
So he's not falling into what we often refer to as the sunk cost fallacy, which is, well, I've already gone in, I need to go all in. You know, sometimes the best course is to back up, realize you don't have the strength, you don't have the opportunity. And we've seen this with him already. He's been cautious at times when he realized that rather than go all in, he needs to consolidate, he needs to build his infrastructure, he needs to build his base of support. And then when the opportunity strikes, he's willing to take the gamble. So it's a good balance of the two.
But oh man, let me tell you, he was pissed. He'd withdraw, but he was gonna kill his brother-in-law. No, literally, he was really going to kill his brother-in-law. But it gets worse. The Oda column is sneaking through forest backroads, Nobunaga cursing loudly about the treacherous Azai, when suddenly there's a noise from one of the trees. A ninja, Sugitani Zenjubo, has been lying in wait for them. He fires his first shot from an arquebus, tosses it aside, and...
Think about that for a second, okay? Imagine the idea you have in your mind of ninjas and what ninjas are. You know, swords and stars and things like, and nunchucks, that kind of stuff. No, this dude's got a gun. He starts with the gun, and then he'll go from there. Ninjas weren't stupid.
And fires a second shot from another arquebus he had primed and ready. Both hit home. Nobunaga is thrown from his horse. Chaos erupts. Sugitani Zenjubo flees, but his job wasn't done. Nobunaga stands up, both bullets having lodged themselves in his armor. And if you thought Nobunaga was mad before, oh boy. So, with an assassination...
And not only mad, but think about, you know, one of the factors in all of this when you're leading people is inspiring them and getting them to want to follow you. Well, what better story to tell than, look, an assassin took 2 shots at me and I'm still standing. You know, there's this level of like divine intervention with that, and I'm blessed by the gods or by God or whoever it is that they're following, and you know, this is only going to increase his stature.
Attempt behind him, Nobunaga makes it back to Kyoto, and over the next 2 months, he rallies his forces. Now, with Tokugawa and Hideyoshi at his side, it's time for him to return to Azai and teach them what it means to betray Oda Nobunaga. It is now July of 1570. The combined Tokugawa and Oda forces have marched into Azai land. They move to threaten one of the main Azai castles, but they're met at the Anegawa River by the combined armies of the Azai and the Asakura. The Azai line up on the east to face the Tokugawa forces, and the Asakura line up on the west to face the Oda. The stage is set for an epic... Wait, no, hold on. Nobunaga wants to switch it up first. The night before the battle, when he sees the Azai flags to the east, he switches his whole line around so his army is facing the Azai, while Tokugawa's handles the Asakura. Because nobody kills Nobunaga's brother-in-law except Oda Nobunaga.
That is a level of spicy that I really enjoy in this. We're going to swap our entire army so that I can face my brother-in-law and deal with him directly.
So now, in the dim twilight hours of the morning, the battle begins, with samurai struggling in the knee-deep water of the Anegawa, steel ringing on steel, waters running red. Nobunaga's forces are barely able to hold their own, pushed back inch by the fury of the Azai assault. Enemy samurai almost reach Oda Nobunaga himself, only to be cut down at the last minute before they can deal the killing blow.
And this is something we see a lot in history, is that, you know, whether you can win on the battlefield against the other guy's army, if you can go and strike the head off the snake, maybe the army goes away, maybe they have nothing left to fight for, maybe they're demoralized. It's a gamble that is often taken in warfare. And we saw a great example of this that happened about, 90 years before this, at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485 in England, where you have Richard III, fairly even numbers, but then some additional forces coming on the side of Henry Tudor. Richard III takes a gamble, and he rides with his retinue right towards Henry Tudor. He's going to kill him and end the battle and end the war once and for all. Well, he failed.
But Ieyasu's forces are faring much better, and just as it looks as though the Oda forces might collapse, the Tokugawa push back the Asakura, and Ieyasu detaches a division to slam into the Azai flank. The Azai start to disintegrate. Nobunaga is saved, and the day is won. But the Oda forces are in too ragged a shape to pursue, and so they withdraw to Kyoto. Seeing the desperate shape the Oda troops are in, another clan, the Miyoshi, the clan that Nobunaga initially kicked out of Kyoto, decided it was time to get theirs back, and
opportunists,
aligned themselves with the Ikoiki, warrior monks who held the nearby temple fortress of Ishiyama Honganji. Now, have you noticed how everyone's coming at Nobunaga piecemeal? If the Azai, the Asakura, the Ikoiki, and the Miyoshi had all worked together, they could have crushed the Oda.
And you could argue this is the enemy of my enemy is my friend thing, but there's so much. I mean, there's so many complicated layers to all of this. There's so many factions and so many shifting alliances and desires. And you know, if your guy over here with his clan wants the same thing you want, you're like, well, I'm not helping him because then he might take it instead of me. So I'm going to try to do this on my... I mean, it's so complicated.
But this is one of the key characteristics of the age. This whole period is a catalog of people living in a state of mutual distrust. This is why the Oda-Tokugawa alliance is so important. Having just one ally that he could consistently count on gave Oda Nobunaga an enormous advantage, and allowed him to mop up the rest of the clans one by one. Which brings us back to the Miyoshi and the Ikoiki. The Miyoshi are sort of a historical footnote, but the Ikoiki are something we've gotta talk about. These guys were militant Buddhists, and when I say militant, I mean these guys were able to kick an entire samurai clan out of the Kaga province and just take it over for 100
Militant Buddhists. I like that. It seems so strange, just like a warrior monk.
years. To put that in perspective, this was the only province in all of Japan not to be ruled by samurai at that time. These guys scared the heck out of Oda Nobunaga and Tokugawa Ieyasu. In fact, they were probably the biggest obstacle between Oda Nobunaga and unifying all of Japan. Luckily for Nobunaga and Ieyasu, these warrior monks were more of a loose coalition than a unified group, suffering from the same distrust and fragmentation that afflicted the rest of the country.
What's the lesson of all this? Unity is everything. If you can get unity and you can be diplomatic and get people on your side, there's nothing you can't accomplish.
Now, in this case, the warrior monks giving the Oda trouble were from the temple of Ishiyama Honganji, a vast fortress complex at the mouth of the Yodo River. Nobunaga sallied out with 30,000 men to reduce the temple. He had to. You see, the thing about the Ikoiki was that they weren't a clan. They didn't follow the same rules of territory. A samurai clan had its domain, and if anybody entered it, well, that meant war. But the Ikoiki were monks, which meant that, sure, they had their province of Kaga, but they basically set up their temples wherever they pleased. After all, it's hard to stop your own peasants from building a nice, peaceful temple in your province. And this temple, Ishiyama Honganji, was just south of Kyoto, where Osaka is today. These monks had been refusing to pay taxes, disrupting trade, and generally just being a nuisance for some time. Nobunaga couldn't have them deep in his territory while he tried to conquer Japan, and now that they'd allied with his enemies, well, it was time for all-out war. So Nobunaga raced south, and his 30,000 men surrounded the temple. The order to attack was given. They tried to charge forward, but the marshy land around the temple dragged at them. They sunk into the tidal flats, weighed down by their heavy armor. Their feet, sucked down by the muddy ground, got trapped in pots that the monks had buried in the wet soil. Then, gun monks. Yes.
Gun monks. These guys are hardcore. And if I ever play another one of these games in this time period, I want to be the warrior monks.
3,000 elite monk arquebusiers came to ruin Nobunaga's day, and Nobunaga learned what everybody else who had tried to dislodge the monks of Ishiyama Honganji had learned. Ishiyama Honganji was impregnable.
One does not simply...
For 11 more years, Nobunaga's men would camp around Ishiyama Honganji, making it the longest siege in Japanese history.
Where were they getting their food and their water? They must have been able to grow their own stuff up there.
No castle defended by samurai, no daimyo's fortress ever held out as long as these peasant monks. But no sooner had Nobunaga's offensive against the Ishiyama Honganji stalled than he learned that the Azai and the Asakura were back in it, coming after him with the warrior monks of Inryakuji.
Oh.
You see what I mean about Buddhist monks actually being Nobunaga's strongest opposition? Well, Inryakuji was a fortified monastery on top of Mount Hiei. Wait, Mount Hiei? Come on, this one's practically in Kyoto. That's it. Nobunaga bites his pride and makes a truce with the Azai and the Asakura. It's time to deal with some monks.
Ha 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 ha. It's all about diplomacy. This guy was not only a great warrior, he was a great diplomat, and that's what's setting him apart from a lot of these others.
Now, the story of Mount Hiei is actually a tragic one. Nobunaga's learned from his experience at Ishiyama Honganji. He wasn't going to try to assault one of these impregnable temples again. Instead, he sets his men to encircle the mountain, and then on his command, he had them light the tree line ablaze. As the fire roared up the mountain and started to consume the temple at its summit in Ryakuji, Oda Nobunaga gave the order to slaughter every man, woman, and child fleeing from the burning temple. 20,000 people died on that day, and all of Japan learned what kind of man Oda Nobunaga really is.
That's about sending a message. I'm not doing this over and over and over again. I do this once, the others get the point.
In our next episode, things get grim for Tokugawa Ieyasu, and one of the most famous ninja in history enters our story.
All right, let's go ahead and dive into part 4.
When we last left off, it was 1571. Nobunaga spent the rest of the year crushing yet more Buddhist monks and finally putting an end to the Azai and the Asakura. But even though things are starting to look better for the Oda, things are about to get grim for the Tokugawa. Takeda Shingen, egged on by the powerless shogun Ashikaga Yoshiaki, decides it's time for him to take Kyoto by marching through Mikawa, Tokugawa Ieyasu's home province. Now, Takeda Shingen is one of the legends of the Sengoku period, and somebody I hope we get to come back to in a future series and spend some more time on. He is no minor daimyo. He is serious business. He's literally the guy who invented the cavalry charge for feudal Japan, and here he's gonna use that cavalry to smash Tokugawa Ieyasu. Tokugawa hastily assembles some of the troops in his home province to oppose the Takeda forces.
So what's happening here is kind of interesting, because I don't know how much he's been at war while all of this has been going on, the story we've been telling. But, from all indications, he's sitting back with a powerful force, letting these people just fight it out. And when they're weak, you can come in and take over. I mean, that's kind of what happens with William the Conqueror, right? William the Conqueror comes across in 1066, and he gets to take on the King of England, Harold Godwinson, after he's just had to march north with his army and fight a battle at Stamford Bridge. And so now he's got to come back south. And so you get to come in and face him. If he had faced him before Stamford Bridge, maybe it's a different story. So sometimes it's nice to just let your enemies just fight it out and weaken each other to the point where you can just march in and take care of business.
Which honestly weren't even coming for him, but rather for making a stab at Kyoto behind him. Tokugawa sets his troops up on an open plain so his arquebusiers can gun down the Takeda. But an open plain is also pretty good terrain for a cavalry charge, and the famous Takeda cavalry horses smash into their line. The Tokugawa forces collapse.
You're firing these arquebuses, you get one shot, and then they're on you. I mean, they're charging at you that fast, so you're not going to slow them down.
The army disintegrates into rabble, fleeing any way they can. Now get this. Ieyasu makes it back to his castle with only 5 men. Yeah, 5. He's a goner. Nobody can hold a castle with 5 people. It is ridiculous to even consider it.
Which means that's probably what's going to happen.
Remember how I once said Tokugawa has this almost preternatural knack for surviving things nobody should? Well, buckle up. Instead of writing his death poem and committing seppuku like any other daimyo would in his place, he had one of his followers light all of the braziers along the castle wall and throw open the gates. Then that same warrior began to beat a great drum. The Takeda didn't know what to do. They suspected some sort of trap, so they hesitated. Then, in the middle of the night...
When you don't act the way that you're expected to, they don't know how to handle that. I love it.
Tokugawa deployed his secret weapon, Hattori Hanzo, the famous ninja warrior. Hattori Hanzo led a band of ninjas to sow chaos amongst the Takeda vanguard, and they did. This was the last straw. With such a bold attack on their leading troops, the Takeda became convinced that Tokugawa Ieyasu must have a ton of men inside this castle, and it was time to turn back. And so, like that, the Takeda retreated, and Tokugawa successfully kept his castle and his life with only 5 men to protect it.
Of course, the question here is, who's writing this story? Who's giving this account that there's only 5 men? There's a good chance that this is being played up to make one side look a certain way.
Of course, the Takeda retreat was also motivated by the fear that if they stayed away from their home province for too long, their great rival, Uesugi Kenshin, would sweep into Takeda land and take over the place. But man, it still takes some guts to throw your castle gate open when you've only got 5 people inside to defend it. That said, I want to pause for a moment and talk about something that always strikes me as funny every time I read about the history of this period. We have this great myth of samurai honor, and on a lot of levels, especially for the lower retainers, it might be true, but so far as I can tell, the samurai in this story are all backstabbing, betraying, and assassinating each other all the time.
The honor and all of that Bushido code and stuff, that has its place, but survival is still the number one motivator. So honor, yeah, sure, that's good, but when honor means I might not be able to win, honor goes out the window.
Now consider the ninja, the actual sneaky backstabbing assassins. It makes absolutely no sense for them not to betray Tokugawa when he is down to their last 5 men, and yet they didn't, because they were absolutely loyal and true. This is going to come up again later. Basically, the only totally trustworthy people in Sengoku Japan are ninja. Alright, so back to the story.
Nice.
In 1573, Takeda Shingen comes barreling back into Mikawa, determined this time to take out Tokugawa on his way to Kyoto. The Tokugawa forces are tied up elsewhere. This could be disaster for Ieyasu. But again, his famous luck holds. At a minor castle siege, Takeda Shingen is shot by a sniper and dies. He is succeeded by his much less capable son, Takeda Katsuyori. When he receives an offer from one of Ieyasu's retainers to betray the Tokugawa capital and throw open the gates, Katsuyori once again leads the Takeda into Mikawa. The plot is discovered, the traitor executed, and the plan foiled, but Takeda Katsuyori decides he can't go home empty-handed, so he decides to attack the small castle of Nagashino.
So my question here is, because he's worried about going home empty-handed, is Does it work the same way? And those of you who might know more about this can answer this question for me in the comments. Does it work the same way in feudal Japan that it works in other places, where the way that you make sure that your army is motivated to keep fighting is that they get a share of loot and that they have something to bring home? You're not just paying your army as loyal retainers. These are a lot of like peasants and conscripts who they need something, and so you can't go home empty-handed or they're not going to keep fighting for you.
Here, though, he's met with stiff resistance. The castle itself rests on the intersection between two rivers, and so can only be attacked from one side, mitigating the massive advantage in numbers that the Takeda have. Nonetheless, the garrison is slowly driven back from the outer works, to the wall, to the keep itself. And this is when one of the great legends of the Sengoku period occurs. A man named Tsunemon volunteers to sneak through the enemy lines and come back with relief for the fort. Late at night, he dives off the wall of the keep, Assassin's Creed style, into the river. The river itself is strung with ropes with bells to alert the enemy army if anybody's trying to creep across, and yet he makes it undetected to the other side. He runs all night and lights a great bonfire on one of the nearby hills to let his besieged fellows know he made it.
Nice.
He makes his way to Tokugawa, who's already encamped with Oda Nobunaga, and tells them how dire the situation at Nagashino is. Immediately, they ride off, the army making good time, but Tsunemon knows the garrison can only hold out for 5 more days at most.
So this is great because you have one guy can do what a full force couldn't do. You couldn't sally out with, 20, 30, 50 men to try to and think, well, hopefully one of them makes it through. Now, your best bet is to do this. And it makes me wonder if he's the only guy who went out, or if maybe they did send 2 or 3 just to make sure, because I feel like you'd want to hedge your bets a little bit and send multiple people by different routes just to make sure one of them gets through.
So he offers to ride ahead and sneak back into the fortress to tell the troops. But
Now
this
that's
time,
gutsy.
the Takeda have switched the position of all of their tripwires and alarms, and Tsunemon is captured. He is dragged in front of Takeda Katsuyori, who makes him an offer. He tells Tsunemon that he'll spare his life if he'll shout to the defenders that no help is coming. Tsunemon agrees, so the next day they raise him up on a crucifix in front of the castle. Tsunemon takes a deep breath.
Freedom! No, I guarantee, I'm just going to guess, he's not going to do what he was supposed to do.
Everything is silent. Tsunemon shouts that Tokugawa's on his way, hold firm. And then he's stabbed with dozens of spears.
That is awesome.
But the garrison does
That is
hold
awesome.
out, and Tokugawa and Nobunaga arrive with their army.
That's like straight out of a movie stuff right there. Is there a movie about this stuff? Because there absolutely should be.
Katsuyori wheels the majority of his forces to face them. The fight is completely uneven. Katsuyori is outnumbered at least 2-1, but he still has that incredible Takeda cavalry that his father built up over the years. And
This is where he should have pulled a Julius Caesar and built a set of fortifications to the outside so that he could hold off any forces that do come.
he is willing to take a gamble. The Takeda cavalry come thundering down on the combined Oda-Tokugawa forces, but they've learned a few tricks since the last time they met the Takeda in battle. They've hastily thrown up a bamboo palisade, a loose fence to blunt the enemy charge.
Yep.
Behind it, they place 3,000 arquebusiers firing in volleys. The Takeda horses are slowed as they...
Firing volleys, why does that matter? Because you got some firing while others are reloading, so you're keeping up a constant fire. That's what you have to do in this situation. This is what happens when you face a new type of warfare, like the cavalry charge. The first time it's going to take you by surprise, but then you're going to start to prepare for it. In World War I, the very first poison gas attack in April of 1915 at the Second Battle of Ypres is wildly successful and blows a huge hole in the lines of the British and the French. But within a couple of weeks, they've started to figure out how to counter that.
They cross the river. Waves and waves of shot pour down on them. Their lines are ragged. The charge has lost all of its impact, all of its shock. And yet still, some of them hurtle on. At last, those few still riding approach the Allied defenses. The arquebusiers retreat and are replaced with men with yari, the long infantry spear. It is not even a contest.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the pride of the Takeda, the cavalry for which they were famous, the cavalry that made up the bulk of their military might, lays scattered on the field. Many of their best generals are dead, and the Oda-Tokugawa forces follow in hot pursuit. The Takeda are practically broken. Just like that, one of the great clans falls. But in their final hours, they make an alliance with their old rivals, the Uesugi, and, wait for it, the warrior monks of Ishiyama.
Oh, here they come.
The Uesugi are probably the last truly great clan left in Sengoku Japan. Uesugi Kenshin, their leader, was often referred to as the god of war, and was thought to be the avatar, the living embodiment of Bishamonten, the Japanese Buddhist war deity.
The avatar, does that mean he can firebend and earthbend and waterbend and airbend all at once?
This could get ugly. When the Oda forces first meet the Uesugi armies in battle, Kenshin smashes the Oda forces by releasing the floodgates on a river just as Nobunaga's men are trying to cross. This defeat halts Oda expansion. It puts them on the defensive. Then, in 1557, Kenshin is preparing a massive assault on Oda lands, perhaps hoping even to destroy them once and for all when he dies, without leaving an heir. Kinda anticlimactic, actually. Upon hearing of his foe's death, Nobunaga is claimed to have shouted, "The empire is now mine."
Yep.
Over the next 4 years, Nobunaga finally subdues the monks of Ishiyama Honganji and crushes the remnants of the Takeda clan. With a long series of victories behind them, Oda and Ieyasu decide it's time for some R&R. So they take a holiday and tour the Kansai. But Oda's holiday is cut short when he receives a letter from Hideyoshi asking for reinforcements in the siege he's maintaining at a castle to the north. Oda packs up his things and tells one of his generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, to start marching the army up to reinforce Hideyoshi. Oda will meet him there. He's gonna detour through Kyoto first to attend to some business on the way.
Interesting.
When Oda gets to Kyoto, he decides to stop for the night with his page and a few retainers at the temple of Honnoji. Akechi Mitsuhide, meanwhile...
This has got me wanting to go to Japan and see some of these sites. It really does. And I've thought about wanting to go to Japan for a while now. I definitely do plan to get there.
Brings the army toward Kyoto to put on a procession through the town on their way to the castle that Hideyoshi is sieging. But then, as the army gets close to the temple, Akechi Mitsuhide shouts, "The enemy is in Honnoji." With this, his pretty confused army rushes the temple. Oda's retainers are cut down as soldiers pour through the complex, until, at last, Nobunaga and his young page retreat to the inner room of the temple. There, they light the room on fire and commit seppuku. And with that, Oda Nobunaga's life comes to an end.
Wow. That was really anticlimactic, considering everything that has happened.
Join us next time to find out what happens to the traitor Akechi Mitsuhide as we draw near to the end of the Sengoku Jidai.
I didn't realize that's how that all went down. Wow, I was not expecting that at all. And this is such a great story, such a fascinating time of history that I know so little about. So I'm excited to dive into parts 5 and 6, which we will do tomorrow. Thanks for watching.